Hey everyone, Matt here with Moesif to talk to you about building an API monetization stack. Now, one thing that we get asked frequently is about monetization. What is the best way to technically get things rolling in the right direction? Part of that is just making sure that you have the right technologies in place and the right processes and also the right methodology behind what you're going to be doing when it comes to monetizing your APIs. Let's actually dig in here and we'll dig into each of these components, high level and low level, as well as a little bit around how Moesif can help closer to the end of the presentation here. Now, the first thing to remember is that great API monetization is hard to do. There are kind of three pillars that we need to look at when we're looking at monetization, and those are developing a pricing strategy, managing API access, and tracking usage accurately. Now, at a high level, these are quite simple, but when we start to scale out, it can become tougher and tougher to do. So developing a pricing strategy, for instance, is a very tough thing to do, as many of us who have went down the route of creating a product and then trying to sell it, figuring out where you should start pricing, what's too high, what's too low, that's a tough hurdle to overcome. The next would be managing API access, which a lot of the time we're going to be looking at API management tools and other tools that can help us manage the access and also manage that access in regards to monetization. So making sure that when a subscription limit is met, that the usage is cut off or that they are charged for the overage. And then tracking usage accurately. As we know at Moesif, this is probably one of the hardest things to do. You need a very, very heavy analytics platform to be able to do this accurately, or at least to do it in an aspect where it can be granular, but also you can do it at a really high level as well. With that being said, what are the actual components of an API monetization stack? So we've got 5 components that we've outlined here, which are the APIs themselves, sign up and enrollment process. So what does that actually look like? The mechanism for controlling access, which in this case we'll be looking at API management. The fourth will be the system of record for tallying usage. And lastly, to make sure that you get paid correctly, you want to make sure that you've chosen a billing provider. Now let's break down each of these components into their little subsections. For the APIs, monetized APIs should contain value that users will pay for. Probably if you're watching this, you've probably have an API that you've created that you think someone will pay for and you'd like to start making money off that. Or maybe you have folks that are already using that API that you want to charge for access or maybe for premium access. You have to have something that people want to buy, or that whether it's B2B or B2C, you have to have something there that someone is willing to pay for. The other component is to make sure that the complexity for those APIs is not so high that it actually detracts from being able to see value quickly. This second point is deliver value quickly, which means we need people to be able to essentially send a request and get a response that gives them value within their product that they're likely building on top of your API. Now, successfully monetized APIs do at least 3 things. They enable developers to have an easy integration. They enable developers to understand the payment structure easily. So here is your base subscription. That includes 3,000 events. And then for every 1,000 events that you're over, you're going to pay X amount of dollars. This is really, really key to make sure that you don't have sticker shock from the first month that a developer uses the API or their organization just doesn't see it as a worthwhile investment. So just like we said, pricing is a key thing to keep an eye on. You should also make sure that when you implement that pricing, that how that pricing and how the payment is structured is easy to understand. Lastly, as you mentioned in the last slide, is being able to deliver value. So the higher the value is, probably the more that you can charge for it, and making sure that you balance those 2 aspects of monetizing the API. Once you have your API created, the next thing that you're going to want to do is actually get people using it. So for that, we need a sign up or enrollment process. There's quite a few ways to do this. You could actually do a sign up for enrollment through API. You could also do it through a UI, which is probably the more popular of the two. And you really want that to look at these four kind of key factors, which are, is my sign up and enrollment process straightforward and accessible? Are people able to go to the site, register, and essentially begin their subscription? The next thing is, as part of that enrollment process, you want to ask for enough information, but not too much. We don't want to have a form with 30 fields in it that maybe only 5 are relevant and the rest are just there for data collection. We don't want that. What we want is, let's grab the minimum amount of info that we need in order to create this user's account. And in some cases that may be email, password for access, and then billing information. That might be the kind of minimum viable product in terms of your sign up or enrollment process. 3, going on top of that would be collect the payment method. So get people in the door. If you're going for like a product-led type of onboarding, maybe you'll do it without a credit card up front. Maybe you will do it with a credit card. It just depends what route you want to go. But likely for an API, you're going to want to collect some form of payment method. A lot of times what people will do is they will collect a credit card, but they won't charge for the first month, and after that it converts over to a paid subscription. Depending on how you want to do your pricing and how you want to do your payments, it's going to factor into this third point here. And lastly, do you offer a free trial? So like we talked about with the collecting payment method, if you're offering a free trial, there could be a ton of value that you could offer there to essentially show the value before they pay. That's a great way to get stickiness in your product. It's also a great way to get a lot of people in the door to try it. The downsides to that, depending on what your API is doing, you want to make sure that it's not going to cost you too much either. Now, when we talk about moving people from, let's say, a free trial through to a paid tier, you really want to make sure that you're tracking that sign-up flow to enhance those conversions. So in this chart that you'll see here, we've got things stepping down. We've got page visit, which is really when you're looking at a product-led growth style of onboarding. That PLG motion really starts from when they first hit your website or when they first hear about your product. But for this case, we'll talk about it in terms of first page visit. How many people visit a page, then sign up? That's your first conversion funnel that you want to look at or process. The next is, how many people sign up and make their first API call? If we go back to what we chatted about on the API front, then we may actually notice that maybe the API is too hard to use. Maybe the API authentication is too tough to get working. We can discern a lot of stuff from this here. So you probably want to have a target of how many people you want to move from sign up to first API call. And from there, you can then develop your strategies. If it's too low, you might want to look at some stuff and go, maybe there's an easier way to improve how to get people to that first API call more quickly or more frequently. And lastly, you have recurring API calls. So this is when you actually really start to make money. Usually when someone calls API the first time, there's not a whole lot of money that's probably being made. What you want is recurring revenue. And this is how you're going to work forward to build your business. So that's why the dollar sign is there. That's that money bag there. So we want to make sure that we improve how people are moving through and bring more people in and then hopefully convert more through each step. Now, as part of that conversion process, we really should opt for self-service sign-up. So we don't want to have a bunch of legal and security holdups. We don't want to have, a bunch of different product priorities. We don't want to have finance and procurement slowing us down. Essentially, everything within the corporate organization could slow down someone actually converting to using the product. How do we get around that? Well, we can do click-through terms of service. We can do fast integration. So if there are product priorities that are kind of backlogging the integration with your API, if you make it easy to use, it could be a quick win. And that means that product priorities are not going to have as much of a factor because it'll be a quick win and a quick implementation. And lastly, for finance and procurement, make it payable through a credit card payment. That is the easiest way. Now, there's always going to be points where maybe a larger contract's not going to be able to do stuff through a credit card. However, if you price things correctly, maybe you could start them on a credit card and then go through the higher levels of procurement and finance later. Now, when someone is signing up for your API, you may want to give pay options while they're enrolling. So there's a couple things to factor in here. You could do prepaid or postpaid billing. You could do tiered or per call pricing. And then you could also offer stuff like volume discounts. You could offer maybe an extended invoice interval. Now, when it comes to prepaid versus postpaid, this is one thing that generally gets talked about quite a bit. What are the differences between the two? And what are the pros and cons? So for prepaid billing, essentially the customer is going to purchase some credits, and then those credits are burned down with usage. With postpaid billing, what you'll get is, as the usage happens, probably at the end of the billing cycle, so maybe a month, they will have X amount of usage here, and this is the bill to pay. Now, there's kind of pros and cons to both of them, and the pros and cons are from the consumer side as well as the business side. On the prepaid side, the pros are you get better cash flow because you're getting that cash up front, and it also is more familiar with traditional enterprises. Now, the pros for postpaid billing mean less onboarding friction. So if you don't know how much you're going to use and you don't want to pay ahead, it's great because what you can get is a quick sign up. You can view your usage throughout the month or throughout the billing cycle and then pay the bill at the end. So for a lot of customers, this might be easier for them. On the tech side, it's actually easier to implement postpaid than it is to implement prepaid. Prepaid is going to require a couple mechanisms to make sure that calls that are past someone's credit that they have, or if they've burned through all their credits, or if there's going to be an overage, being able to put those processes in place to automatically bill for that. Whereas with postpaid, you add up the usage, cut it off at the billing date, and then pass the bill out for payment. Now, the cons of prepaid billing include friction in onboarding. So sometimes with prepaid, people having to pay for a service before they've actually tried it out or used it, sometimes that could cause a little bit of friction. A way around this might be to create a free trial or give a prepaid amount of credits. A lot of folks do this with their SaaS businesses. It's a great way to get people in. You can still collect a credit card if you wanted to, but this is going to at least give initial credits without worrying them too much. And as I mentioned in the postpaid, pay-as-you-go billing can actually be really difficult to implement. And doing that, you might run into a couple bugs here and there as you're implementing that specific strategy. Now with postpaid billing, from a business perspective, there is an additional credit risk. So if a user was to use thousands of dollars in credits and then is billed for those at the end of the cycle and they're not able to pay that, then your business will have to pursue them to get that or just have a loss on that specific customer. So that can be an issue. And because of this, this setup can be abused as well. Because what's going to happen is if someone's not going to pay the bill, you might not know that until they've already had 1 or 2 or 3 months of usage, depending on what the net terms are in terms of payment. So there is definitely some risk there from a business perspective, but it is easier to implement as well. Now, when it comes to how to actually package the API calls, we can start looking at a packaging strategy. So we have 2 examples here, which is tiered pricing versus per call pricing. Tiered pricing, this is traditional SaaS pricing where you pay for a predefined suite of features or a predefined quota, and that's based on the tier that you're taking. Now for per call pricing, this is usage based or consumption based. So you're going to pay per unit of usage. Both of these can work. Sometimes some companies will have a mix of both of these. The pros of the tiered pricing would be it enforces a min spend. So if I'm charging for a subscription, I know that the minimal spend that they're going to have is that subscription per month, possibly plus overages. It's predictable for the customer as well. I'm paying X amount of dollars and I'm getting X amount back. And from a technical perspective, it's pretty easy to implement. Now for per call pricing, you'll see that the pros is that it's more efficient for customers. So it means they only pay for what they're using. For the most part, depending on how things are structured, this could technically deliver more value to the customer per dollar that they're spending. There's also less friction and expansion. There's also the opposite of that, which means that if they dial down usage, their spend could go down significantly. So it does make it very easy to scale up. If they use more, they're going to pay more. And what a lot of the times happens, it does appear cheaper. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is cheaper, but it will appear cheaper to the users. The cons of the tiered pricing are friction and expansion. So let's think about, I have a tier for $200 per month and I have a tier for $500 per month. Currently right now, maybe the tier 1, if I start getting charged overages, I have to get a certain amount of overages before I justify going to that next tier. Pricing strategy plays into this a lot. So, there's tons of articles and tons of stuff to read out there on how to do this effectively. But it can, by going to a tiered pricing strategy, can reduce people from actually upgrading, a little bit later than what you would want to see. So you want to really have that min spend increased as quickly as possible. And sometimes tiered pricing can affect that. And this is because it is rigid. It might not be aligned to value. So this is why it may look cheaper for the per call pricing. So if I'm paying $200 a month, but if I was paying per call, I might only be paying $50 per month, then there's a value gap there because I can't reduce my minimum tiered pricing because it starts at $200. So per call pricing might be the way that someone would go because it appears cheaper. However, there will be a threshold where hopefully the tiered pricing will be a better deal than the spend per call, but you have to reach that first. Cons on the per call side would be you can kind of get customers that can be pretty upset with billing surprises. So if a customer, let's just say there's a bug in their code that's continually calling your API and they were expecting a $10,000 bill per month and got a $100,000 bill per month, that would be an issue. And that's kind of hard to reconcile sometimes. So do be prepared for that and probably make sure that you have mechanisms in place, especially from a customer support perspective, to make sure that usage is matching what the customer expects. And with per call pricing, it can also be somewhat complex to implement because you need to be able to dial in exactly what you want to bill on and make sure that it's tallied correctly. Luckily, Moesif can help you with that, and we'll go into that closer to the end of the video. Our next one here is invoicing strategy. So a lot of the times people are going to shift towards this first option here, which is recurring. So customers invoiced on a schedule like a month, a quarter, or a year. That's a pretty common way of doing it. However, there are some, like you can set up in AWS, for instance, where you're billed based on a threshold. So once you've reached a specific threshold, let's say $300, what can happen is you can set it up so that as soon as $300 is met, account is essentially blocked, and then the invoice is sent. Okay, you've got a bill for $300, pay it, and then can continue. Now, there's a couple pros and cons on each side here. So for recurring, easier for finance team. They know that they're getting billed every month, quarter, or a year. So that's on the customer side, the finance team. It's a little bit easier for them, and it's also more predictable. I know I'm getting an invoice every single month. On the threshold side, the great part is that you have a reduced transaction cost. And it also makes prepaid easier to do if you do this. So once they hit a threshold, let's say they put $300 in credits, and then they have to top up those credits again if they come to a threshold. Or even if you did postpaid, once they hit a specific threshold, it's sent over. Now, there's cons to this. It's harder for the finance team to recognize the revenue. Kind of on both sides, honestly, because what you get is if, let's just say 1 week they reach their $300 quota and then they don't reach that $300 quota again for 3 weeks after that, it's very unpredictable type of income for a business, and it's also very unpredictable from a customer perspective of when that's going to be paid out. So there is some company liability there. Now, on the recurring side, there's obviously cons too, which is bad unit economics for low-cost SaaS. And this can become very complex if you're doing a prepaid strategy. So recurring prepaid strategy could be tough to implement. Now that we've got a lot of the pricing and the packaging stuff out of the way, let's take a look at how we would actually control access through API management for our monetized APIs. Now, API management, if you're unfamiliar, in terms of API monetization, it's really going to give you three things. You're going to be able to secure your APIs with it in a really uniform way. You're going to be able to productize your APIs more easily, and you're going to be able to collect API metrics more easily as well. A lot of the platforms out there are going to offer similar functionalities, but each of them has kind of their pros and cons, and there's a massive amount of vendors for API management that are out there. If I'm going to go forward and use API management, what is that actually going to add for me? So it's going to add a couple things. You can add, and I would say probably the biggest thing would be security and authorization. So you're going to be able to control access to your APIs using authorization and authentication. And the mechanisms that work within the API management realm usually mean that you can apply it across all of your APIs, which is, a really, really convenient way to do things. If you build a new API, you can just wrap it in the same security that your existing APIs are in right now. Same with if you have multiple APIs that are kind of disparate, what you can do is you can take a single authentication or authorization mechanism and apply it across that entire subset. So it's very simple to do, very easy to set up usually too. Another is user management. So, a big thing would be API keys, for instance. You're able to provision API keys or API access tokens through that API management solution, and then the API management solution will grant access based on that key and on that user management principle. So with that part of API management, you're able to view and manage who has access to the APIs. You also will have this ability to do data governance too. So you might limit the amount of data that can be accessed or viewed through the APIs or through the API management portal based on the role that that user has. And lastly is the ability to create a developer portal. Now, although some of them are a little limited in functionality, they can be a great way to easily expose APIs to the public and then generate API keys, and a lot of the time being able to do self-service API monetization can be enabled through those developer portals. So API management overall adds a lot of merit to our API monetization stack. And it really is a key hub in that. And once we have that API management in place, then we need to take metrics from there and be able to pull them into our system of record for actually tallying usage. So when you use a system to create usage records, it at a minimum should do two things, which is it needs to create accurate usage records because you're charging customers for usage. The last thing they want to see is a discrepancy. If they used 5 API calls, they want to say that they used 5 API calls, not 7, not 3, although they might be happy if it's underreported, but that is going to cause an issue on the business side. So it is crucial for your business and for the consumer that you create accurate usage records in that system of record. And the other piece is to provide timely reporting to the billing provider. This is extremely crucial if you're doing prepaid. Postpaid, obviously, as you want to report as often as possible. But for prepaid, you're going to need to report so that their balance can be burned down. And if you don't have that in place, it's a little bit harder to do prepaid. So being able to report that from the usage book of record reported to the billing provider in a timely manner is very important. Now, on top of those base functionalities, the best solutions will also offer a few other things. And that is, it should provide support for various metrics to bill upon. If we only do per API call and say any API call is going to get charged for, we're very limited in our use case of how we can monetize. But if we can go beyond that and say if a user has used API A, B, or C, and they received a 200 or 201 response, and the body of the request contained a specific field, then I want to monetize. That's flexibility, and that's what the best solutions are able to offer. A lot of the times, these require deep analytics capabilities to actually be able to do this type of metric billing. The other is allowing business users to access the platform. If you have a monetization book of record or system of record, you want other groups that are non-technical to probably be able to access that. So whether it's product, finance, whoever, they should be able to build reports. They should be able to see what usage looked like really, really easily, instead of actually having to engage an engineer to do that. And lastly is allowing for easy auditing. Whenever you're dealing with transactions that revolve around money, you want to make sure that you're able to easily audit that. So if someone comes in with a billing issue, you're able to go back through the audit trail and look and either explain what happened to cause that bill, or be able to prove that the billing solution didn't do as intended. You need to have that audit trail, and that a lot of the times that's also just required from an industry perspective as well. Now, once you've built APIs, built an enrollment flow, secured it all with API management, have come around to adding all of these usage statistics, the last thing that we need to do is actually choose a billing provider. And that billing provider should probably take into consideration a few things, which are, does this billing provider have existing integrations with other platforms? So maybe you're using another platform, maybe finance is using another platform. Does it have integration with that? A lot of them do. Many of the more popular billing solutions do have a ton of integrations. You also want to figure out what pricing schemes that billing provider supports, because that's also going to influence how you can monetize that product. Do they support tiered pricing, or do they only do it, per unit of usage? The more flexibility, the more options you have as you go down the road. 3, and I would say probably the most pertinent to developers would be, is it easy to work with? You want to make sure that you choose a platform that either people that are working on this are already familiar with, or at least doesn't have a huge learning curve. Now there's obviously some balance there, where if there is a big learning curve, but there's a lot of benefit in terms of maybe they support some really, really cool pricing schemes, it could be worth it. But you definitely don't want the billing provider to be the crux of the solution. So make sure you pick something that fits your needs, fits your future needs, but also is easy enough to work with. And a lot of times the easiest way to vet that is to go to the documentation, see what they've written, and make sure that it's easily read and understood. And number 4 would be the support for billing issues and auditing. You're definitely going to want to make sure that the platform has the ability to do that, because if you're charging a customer's credit card, or if you're creating invoices, you want to make sure, for the customer's sake, that those are accurate, and that for your business's sake, that those are accurate as well, to make sure that the customer is getting charged correctly and not overpaying or underpaying, and then your business is also making the correct amount of dollars. So some examples of billing providers would be, kind of these 3 here, which would be Stripe, Recurly, and Chargebee. These are 3 really, really popular billing providers that work really, really well with a self-service motion or a product-led motion. Now, when it comes to creating these monetization stacks, one of the most flexible solutions is to actually use Moesif. And part of that is because Moesif actually creates a really great ecosystem for API monetization. So you take your APIs and plug them into an API management solution or into one of the Moesif SDKs. Then the usage is recorded automatically in Moesif, and you can create billing meters to actually say what you want to monetize and how you want to monetize it, and then automatically ship that usage off to Recurly, Stripe, Chargebee, or a plethora of custom solutions, which then means that you can use those platforms to invoice and collect the dollars that are owed to you for your API usage. And with that, be sure to click subscribe to get more videos from us around API monetization and API analytics. And thanks for watching this overview on building an API monetization stack. See you soon.